Hey friends, my name is Chris Kloss and welcome to the Tinnitus Manifesto podcast. In this podcast, we look at all things related to musicians and hearing issues. Today, me and my co-host for the show, Nashville audiologist Dr. Rebecca Grome, continue with the physics of sound. We pick up at volume and start to wrestle with how all of the more physical, measurable aspects of sound mix together and how neurology can basically screw the whole thing up. We then get into a little tangent on the benefits of music for the brain. Hope you enjoy the Tinnitus Manifesto, the Physics of Sound, Part 2. Frequency, we've hit harmonics.
Yep.
Volume. What? How do you describe that?
It's
Basics,
the intensity.
really basic.
Yeah, intensity would be another one.
Right.
I think
like
also
pressure, increase of pressure, sound pressure.
Yeah, intensity, loudness, that kind of stuff. I always think about loudness being more so a pitch thing. So you can, frequency and pitch, we talked earlier, how they're kind of interchangeable or they're similar.
Yes.
I think, to me, in my head, pitch is more of a loudness measurement or a psychological perception of how much intensity is around that sound. So, when I think about that, it's always like, okay, you were talking earlier about how the human ear, you would think that a piano would go over 4,000 hertz.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how some people perceive 4,000 hertz as a high pitched sound,
Right.
and some people perceive 4,000 hertz as a low pitched sound.
Right.
So I think when we talk about loudness or that kind of stuff, it's more of a perception thing. It's how much color is in the sound that you're hearing.
Yep. And this is why, audio editing is such a huge thing, right? Production. And as we got in with Peter last week, or a couple last episode, it's just, that's where the magic happens to some extent. That's what defines sound. Like, that's what I often think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you just spoke fundamental, if you got rid of all the harmonics, somehow you could be in a vacuum in a room, right, and have the fundamental pianos hit a note and then a fundamental guitar hit the same note, same fundamental, and you didn't have any of the harmonics, they would sound remarkably similar, right? They would sound a lot more alike because a piano has different harmonics than a guitar does, right? That's the thing that defines their sound in many ways, right?
Correct. And then the intensity of how you hit a piano key is going to be different than the intensity of how you hit
a
guitar.
Attack, as they call it, attack when you're editing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And attack and release of sound and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And this is how, again, envelope filters work. This is how pedal, any effects pedal works. So, a chorus pedal is just moving through frequencies, a boosting of different types of frequencies at different rates to create the sound that they're creating, or crossing them and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I found interesting is, part of the pianos, and each individual piano sounds different because they each have different harmonic resonances, right?
Correct.
Your timbre. That's what gives them their distinct timbre. It gives them their distinct sound. Whatever, all those words you can use, but it's their harmonic makeup that defines how each piano sounds different from each other, even though you might be hitting that same, middle C or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it comes back to, again, that's what happens to us. It's not just objective. It's not just subjective. It's also objective.
Correct.
Right. So your brain hears it differently from my brain, as well. And your ear hears it differently because your ear shape is different from mine, blah, 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 all that stuff. Like, it gets down to that individual.
So, yes. And the other thing too, that we need to talk about when it comes to intensity or volume is, we measure sound in decibels.
Right.
So up until this point, we've been talking about frequency and simple calculations to calculate what frequency you're at. So if you go up an octave, you double your frequency. Now that we're talking about loudness,
Hmm.
it doesn't work like that. It's not a simple
Yeah.
double calculation.
It's more complicated,
And
more
yes,
subject, more subjective.
well, there's like a mathematical formula that you can use to determine. So if you play a 1000 hertz tone
Right.
at 30 dB, it's going to be perceptually louder than a 500 hertz tone at 30 dB.
Yeah.
So
Explain why.
yes, and that is well,
Well, it's energy, right? It's sort of
it's
the energy.
energy.
Right.
Yes, and that's where things get sticky, is
Yeah.
because now we have instead of the simple calculation of like figuring out what a pitch or a tone or a note is,
Yep.
volume or intensity of that signal varies depending on the pitch.
Yep. Exactly. And again, that's what makes it so confusing and so challenging. And also, again, this explains why my human voice is registered as 100, hertz, right? But the frequencies but that is not the loudest frequency you are hearing, right? You're hearing more the 300, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 from my voice. It's
Yeah.
not, that's so, and each one of those has a different volume, right? So, and this is what, and we're also sort of explaining, if you and everyone can do this, right? You run any music or any voice or anything through an EQ, you see this is what we're talking
Mhm.
about essentially, right?
Yeah.
So as you talk, different frequencies are jumping up at different rates at different times, right?
Correct.
So you, and again, as an audiologist and trying to get a fit for a hearing aid, fit for an in-ear monitor, has to take all of these things into account for the individual.
Correct.
Correct? Right.
Yeah. So musicians, I think by default, think of SPL, dBSPL,
Yeah.
sound pressure levels. I
Yeah.
have to think in HL, which is your hearing level essentially.
Which is
Um,
half essentially, right? Like,
it
or
depends. It
okay,
depends on the frequency. So, for example, a
yeah,
250 hertz tone,
right.
um, for to make that 0 HL on my chart, it's 27 dBSPL. Now,
Okay,
a 1000 hertz tone to be 0 on my HL chart is 7.5. So you see, each frequency has its, musicians are thinking in SPL,
right.
and I'm thinking in a different, in a different metrics, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and w- so explain why. And again, this, a lot of what we've been talking about sort of explains why. But if you can sum it up, like why you are having to do it that way compared to why we are in this separate world as far as those terms are concerned.
Well, we have to think about sound from a true intensity level mathematically
Right,
versus what the human ear is doing.
right.
And those
Because
just
that's
don't match up because of
okay.
resonance, because of anatomy, because of perception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So it's more accurate, obviously. Your approach is more refined, at least for when it comes to individuals, applying to individuals and their hearing.
Correct.
Maybe. And then would you say like the
Treatment. I guess it would be
yeah,
more of a treatment conversation.
there you go. So
Yeah.
SPL might be more general public,
Yes. When you're
maybe.
out and about and you do a sound level reading. So
Yeah.
I say, hey, go out and this is where I think this conversation needs to happen. So someone wants to start a hearing conservation program, or we see the beginning stages of a noise notch at 4,000 hertz. And I'm like, you know what? What's your noise levels look like? What's your feed in your in ear? I mean, any patient of mine who has
Right.
come to see me and had this conversation, this is what I ask them.
Mhm.
What are you listening to? How many minutes or how many hours is your set? What type of set do you play?
Right.
I need to know all of these things
Yeah.
because I want them to get an SPL reading. I want to know, without anything in your ears,
Right.
how much noise are you exposed to? I want to know how much your peak is, what's your highest SPL reading.
Right.
I want to know what your average SPL reading is
Yeah.
based on your show.
Yep.
Now, in the human ear, we're not going to just pull away. If their peak is 105,
Right.
we're not going to just pull away 105 dB SPL away from them.
Right.
We are bringing them down and making judgments for what is an acceptable amount of dB perception. So if someone comes in and they have let's say they have a 60 dB HL noise notch at 4K. We're not adding in 60 dB of HL at 4K for them to perceive that or to make the sound more normal.
Right. And again, it's the mathematical formula that you kind of have to approach.
And that's where you're getting your half gain rule. You're thinking of amplification.
The half gain rule. Right.
The half gain rule. So if someone comes in and they are like, hey, my mix doesn't sound right, my vocals don't sound right in my feed, I say, okay, we're not going to EQ this to 0. We're going to do a half gain rule.
Right.
So if you have 40 dB loss at a frequency, you're going to add in 20 dB of gain.
There it is. There it is. That's what I was, and that's sort of a rough translation, trying to apply more to speaking to you, from the audiologist's perspective, right?
Yeah. We're talking about SPL is a external reading versus HL is
an
internal human ear perception and how we apply treatment.
Okay. You actually had mentioned one of the episodes, downloading that Decibel, the app. Go ahead and mention it again, just for the heck of it, because it is helpful.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're going to talk about like hearing conservation and noise measurements and whatnot,
right. What's that app?
NIOSH. NIOSH is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They're the conservative group that does all of the research for appropriate listening levels. They do have a dB reader.
Yeah.
That you can download on your phone. I would recommend
any musician getting it. It's just a free app. You can use it.
It's a free app.
And it's fun to play with.
And the NIOSH one is the conservative one. So for NIOSH, you start at 80 dB for 8 hours. And for every 3 dB you go up, you cut your time in half.
And that's, I'm looking at some numbers right here. And again, see, it's always interesting to me to look at the dB ratings of instruments compared to the NIOSH recommended times to listening. And just, and again, I'm looking at,
we can link that resource, like where we can do in the comment section.
Right. Yeah. It's just, but again, it's interesting. 60 dBs is roughly conversation level, like for 60, speaking.
65. Yep. Mm-hmm.
65. And again, it varies, it's still more complicated for you as an audiologist if you were trying to adjust someone's hearing at 60 dB, right? We're going back to the half rule, and that stuff, same thing. To avoid, I don't want to get too confused here. So we're just going to keep it at decibels. And if you want to correct or change anything, but again, I did notice if you're playing piano loudly, it gets anywhere from 85 to 103 decibels.
Mm-hmm. SPL.
And it says, looking at the NIOSH stuff, you don't want to spend more than an hour at 94 decibels. You don't want to spend 15 minutes at 100 decibels. You don't want to spend more than 3.5 minutes roughly at 106 decibels. Mm-hmm. So the piano goes up to 100, whatever, a loud piano goes up at 103. So what, you can only listen to a loud piano for, 3 minutes without damage? Of course, these are the conservative estimates.
That's conservative estimates, but also
powerful shit.
That's
man.
loud piano.
Yeah.
So the easiest way to take that measurement is to download the app.
Right.
Run a 10 or 15 minute, 30 minute if you can,
Yeah.
time weighted average,
Right.
and use that number, your average number, as your full listening volume.
Yeah. If you're
Because
playing a
because you're
gig,
going to be below that and you're going to be over it, like throughout that time.
yeah,
So
strictly speaking, if you download the app, you could, get on stage, just put your phone down, turn it on, have the app on, play for a set, have it do all the readings. You could probably
yeah,
get all the readings you need in one set and just find out.
correct.
Yeah, that's actually, um,
Pretty
that's
easy.
cool.
Yeah.
That's a quick way to get readings of what you're experiencing, and it'll help your audiologist. You come in, you show them what this, and they'll, their hair will stand up on end when they see how loud it is.
No, we
Uh,
don't. It just gives us information. We
yeah,
can
their
realistically talk.
hat will
Yeah.
shoot off their head, and you know,
Is it when my hair looks bad all the time?
yeah, maybe that's, that's like, let's say that's a good excuse. You can always
That's
use
my
that if you
excuse
need
from
to.
now on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the thing is, some there are some musicians and people, and we're not talking just musicians. I mean, I work with factory people in construction, factory workers,
Right.
all that kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
Um, the music industry is essentially unmonitored.
Right.
Whereas if
Right.
you're working in a
Unregulated that way. Yeah.
unregulated, yeah. So if you're working in a factory or you're working construction or you're working with a company, they have to follow OSHA regulations.
Right.
Now, NIOSH does the research and says this is what we believe is best. And they take it to OSHA, and OSHA takes it to unions and lobbies and says,
Yeah.
this is too conservative. Let's find a happy medium. So
Right.
that's why a lot of people think it's the 5 dB. So instead of 80, 83, 86,
It's
it's
85.
80, 85,
85.
90.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Uh,
Yeah. So if you don't like being that conservative, as long as you're measuring things and being slightly mindful, I don't care which formula you're using.
yeah.
Um, it's
Right.
just being aware. It's awareness of this is what I'm exposed to.
Yeah. And this is what we're, ultimately trying to do in this podcast, in this whole project. It
Mhm.
is set back to saving that 1 billion cochlear hairs, and just information, knowledge is power,
Yes.
So, so again, back to the combination, you have the combination of harmonics, volume, pitch, uh, they change each other. You can't just look at one independently, right? They all change each other. They affect each other.
Correct.
As an audiologist, again, is there anything more to your formula when you're trying to take into account speech as well as music? And or maybe another question might be, how do you alter that formula relative to speech and music?
I think the whole point of this podcast so far is to
Right.
differentiate and for people to understand not only the language barrier between musicians
Hmm.
and audiologists,
Right.
but also understanding that music and speech is very different because of what type of sound you're
Right.
getting with music versus
Hmm.
speech.
Totally.
hmm And then, the scary part is always, we can talk all day about sound and pitch and harmonics and that kind of stuff. But the scary part is, what does that mean in terms of what you are perceptually hearing? And then once you get that baseline measurement, how are we going to manipulate that sound and
Right.
retrain your brain so you can use the tools that you're provided with to function better?
Yeah. And again, we've been trying to avoid the neurology part of this, but and of course it's impossible essentially to not incorporate that to some extent. We've done quite a good job so far, for this episode, and I want listeners to know that we are actively avoiding that in this particular episode. We're trying to just get the basics of the physics of sound. It's very easy to fall into that rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
Of perception and all that kind of thing. And again, it's almost impossible to avoid, because you as an audiologist needs to define, you need to define the difference between music and hearing, and how for musicians, we, like I said, we're not seeing it that way.
Yeah.
Anytime you're speaking to a musician, that's the first question you have, like in your head, or that's the first, that's what you are, those are your wheels turning, saying,
Yeah.
speech or music, it's,
Hmm.
we're playing between those two things. And I think, again, if there's one good hint for those of us, any musician, any artist out there, anybody's listening who does wear hearing aids or is thinking of getting them, if you're a musician, you definitely want to try to have two different settings. They won't agree. Like, I know same with me. Like, when I sit at my piano, I have to change my hearing setting, because and it's not bad. Like, the speech setting works, but it's not as full. It's not as rich. It's not as resonant, all that stuff. And I
Yeah.
do know other musician friends who wear hearing aids who do the same thing. And quite frankly, some of us prefer to live, if we're not doing a lot of conversation, if we're not really having to, focus on, it's kind of nice to live in that, what they call what sometimes is called the quiet setting.
Yeah.
Because you're hearing more. I'll
Yeah.
have to go for a walk outside and I'll just be amazed. Like last night, I had the quiet setting on. I'm walking. I saw you recently got the new settings. We changed the quiet a little bit, and I can hear the difference. And I was outside, and I was hearing the cicadas compared to the birds at night, compared to the cars
Yeah.
going by, and it was just like, my God, this is so cool. And a lot of that is these upper frequencies, which is something that, have the new setup I have has added so much more richness that
Yeah.
way.
I think it's I'm sure you can agree. I think a lot
Mhm.
of it is a control thing too, right? Because when you lose control over something, obviously it causes anxiety and it
Oh
causes a
yeah.
sense of a loss of self. And
Yes.
so when we talk about hearing loss and noise exposure and potentially treating that or overcoming it,
Right.
initially you lose a sense of self because you don't understand where your reference point is anymore. So again, we don't want to get into neurology, but your reference point is in your head. And that
Uh-huh.
reference point has changed slowly over time. And now all
Yep.
of a sudden we're digitally changing things that you're not in control of. What's you how many times have you come into my office and you're like, can you please turn off the compression? And I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah.
no, I can't.
That's what I call the baseline for me. Like, I have to reestablish, and again, this is my own language. I don't know, I think probably your terminology is more correct. You didn't call it the baseline, you called it just what did you just refer to it as? Uh this,
Your
just
reference.
your point of reference, right?
Yeah.
The sound. So the way I hear, like, every time I get a new hearing aid, I have to change what I call my hearing baseline, what you're calling the point of reference, right? And that's such a huge adjustment. Like I said, when you get a new set of a new set of studio monitors, it's the same
Hmm.
thing. You have to
Same
change,
thing.
you have to adjust, you have to learn how these frequencies sound from this device. And
Hmm.
there's some adjustments you can make to change that, but there's only so much you can do. And of course, yeah, over time, if you haven't worn, if you've lost your hearing over 8 or 10 years, like kind of like we were talking about with Peter last episode, you you suddenly you get this new device and everything sounds bright and insane and uncomfortable and sometimes unpleasant. And part of it is you need to adjust to that. There's always a hard adjustment there. That's
Yeah.
been the big challenge for me. I'm getting better at it. Like, now I'm okay. Like, it's happened so many times. It's become a game, like, just getting adjusted to the new device, right? Or the new setting. It's become sort of this adventure. How can my brain adjust now? Or
Yeah.
what differences am I finding? It's really, and it's, strangely enough, I think it's probably healthy for my brain. I think it's I'm challenging my neuroplasticity every time I'm doing this, right? When I get a new device in, my brain is having to evolve. And when I play the piano, I'm trying to
Yeah.
bend my hearing towards this new setup. And it's a learning experience. It's stimulating, though. It feels kind of cool, you know?
Yeah. I think it's when we get to like kind of the neuroscience side of this,
Right.
I think it'll be really good for us to talk about cognitive therapy and how sound and music is becoming the gold standard for cognitive therapy. And
Yeah.
so, that definitely should be appealing to musicians who find themselves potentially, if they have severe noise induced hearing loss, or they're
Right.
struggling with background noise, or they have their extended high frequencies gone.
Yeah.
um, the, we can go back to something they love to provide the treatment and to rebuild those neurological pathways. And so when we do talk about neuroscience and that kind of stuff, we'll really dive into music therapy and cognitive therapy, and some of the other really fun things that are kind of taking the forefront for treatment methods. Mhm.
I again can speak with a direct experience from this, and just from having this sort of, after stopping playing for a while and then getting back into it and getting more into the piano. It's a neurological, like, we'll get into this. My mom died of early onset Alzheimer's at 70, right? I'm 54,
Yeah.
and she started noticing it around 60. So shit, man, I want to keep my brain working, if
Yeah.
it's in my family, plus I have hearing issues. Like, of course, hearing issues are known to cause, brain,
Oh, yeah.
Alzheimer's, these kinds of problems, dementia. So yeah, I'm fighting that like a motherfucker, man. Like, and piano honestly is a way to do it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
learning these Bach pieces. I'm trying to really learn, right and left independence. And I feel like,
Yeah.
it's helping me in so many different levels, not just the way I'm hearing. My ears are tuning in. My ability to hear and tune, I think, is improving, is getting better, because I'm just tuning into things better. And plus, just the mental stimulation, the right and left brain, right and left body, all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
and yeah, I think this is going to be something more pronounced as we get into this, because, and more valuable. People are going to be listening to this partially because of this stuff too, because
Yeah.
it's brain health. It's not just hearing health. It is brain
It is
health.
brain health. Yeah. I know we have a grand piano at my house, and I grew up playing all throughout high school. But my
Right.
husband, Nick, he plays beautifully, and he can sight
He's the
read, and
musician.
he can,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
he's the musician part in my family. But yeah, I sat down last night, and Chris, that life has been a little bit crazy for me this
Right.
month, or
Right.
this summer, really.
Yep.
And I haven't played piano in probably 6 months. And of course, I sit down and I try to play. And the first thing I said to myself was not that my hands aren't working, but my brain's not working. I was
Yeah.
like, it's not. I've literally been playing the same song since I was 18. I haven't like learned a new song since I was 18 years old. I've been
Right.
playing these songs for almost 20 years.
Right.
So it's not my fingers, it's my brain. And
Yeah.
after I got through about an hour of just tinkering around, I was like, gosh, I just feel so much better. Now my pinky hurts, but
Well, and yeah, it's been, like I said, it's been kind of a life change for me getting into piano. After, like, I've talked in one of the solo episode, I talk about sort of the evolution of my, being a musician, and then kind of
yeah,
just stopping everything and
yeah,
getting back into it. And I feel like I'm starting fresh again. I am an adult musician. I'm adult piano student, essentially. Like, I really am learning some basic shit, and just like a lot of these basic piano, like I could always write and hit chords, but I didn't have right left independence, didn't have all that kind of thing.
yeah,
um it's awesome. I love it. And I do feel, I mean, it brings so much joy. Like, it's a therapy to me. I find
it
it
is.
calms my brain down to
Correct.
sit for an hour, have 45 minutes, half hour, just trying to work on a piece and trying to refine it and get
Yeah,
the metronome on. I find it is really, it's therapy in so many different ways. I I'm so grateful that I have the time and the opportunity and the ability now to really do that, and enjoy doing it. It's cool.
yeah. I
Uh,
know Perry needs to start some. I think we're going to do drum lessons for him just from a rhythm standpoint, but we're
cool.
going to get him in piano too. And I was just like,
Right.
man, I'm so excited to do this so I can sit down and relearn.
Yeah. Right. And that's a great, teaching is the best way to learn. So you do a little teaching and you'll remember all the shit that, you knew and stuff like that
Hmm.
too, which is,
Hmm.
uh, um, but yeah, I kind of wish I had focused a little more on piano earlier on. Like I look back, I'm like, man, I think I would have understood the bass better if I had learned a little more piano early. I mean, again, like no regrets. But um, I feel like I'm a much more thorough musician now than I was even just a year ago or 2 years
Hmm.
ago, just learning the piano more specifically.
So I think that's funny because I'm always like, man, I really want Perry to learn guitar so he understands chords.
Piano is better to learn chords, man. No, I mean, or at least
Really?
theory, right? Well, guitar, I mean, guitar is kind of, in some ways, it's easier to just play a G and to learn that stuff. But if you're learning theory, if you're learning chords, you can see it on piano, right? You
That's
know what
true.
a C major looks like. That's sort of what I mean. I learned bass first, and I think my understanding of theory would have been richer if I'd learned piano earlier. You
Yeah,
know
I
what I
guess
mean?
that's
And
true.
just
Yeah.
the understanding, like you said, you can see the 12 tones, you can see them, and you just piano is better that way, I think.
Yeah, I didn't think
Um,
of it that way. Hmm.
I don't, and I'm newfangled on the piano. And like I said, I've always loved piano. I could play a little bit, but I've never really tried to learn like a piano player, like, in a proper way.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that really hard. Piano's a difficult instrument, man. It's a challenging.
Hmm.
I didn't realize, anyone who knows how to play, they're like, no, I can do it. It's easy. But no, I'm trying to learn the Charlie Brown theme song. Da, 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 da,
That's
da, da.
rhythmically challenging.
It is really like, yeah, the right and left hand is funky as hell. I had
Very
no
different. Yeah,
idea.
rhythms going
Uh,
on.
I'd try to
Um,
play it, but I'd slaughter it right now. I'll just need to, but it is one of the things I've been working on. And I realize how great it is for my brain to be doing, again, that syncopated stuff in the right and left sides. Bass doesn't
yeah,
play that way, right? It's more,
that's true.
it's a very different psychology. It's fun,
Yeah. That whole like that the Vince, I never say his name right.
Vince Guaraldi. Yeah.
Guaraldi, that like the Charlie Brown Christmas piano music.
Oh yeah.
Um
It's some of the
Very challenging.
best. It's
So
all
hard
very,
though.
yeah, it's all really hard. Well, it's a
Yeah.
sort of a mix between classical and, classical
Jazz.
and jazz and sort of pop. Like it's a very strange
Yeah.
combination of all of them. And it goes into the swing modes and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's
But
not my
that's been
jam.
my, yeah, no, it's more my jam, I think, and again, I came from a jazz background, so I can kind of improvise on piano and do that shit. My goal for Christmas is to be able to play through, at least one or two of those songs. So
Yeah.
it's August. I'm starting now.
Is it Scott Joplin that did all the ragtime stuff?
Yeah, Scott Joplin.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I just remember trying to learn one of those stupid ragtime songs. And I was like, you know what?
Oh man.
That's just not for me.
Oh, and
Why
yeah,
can't
the
I learn like Little
stride
Mermaid or
piano, and it's
something?
just exactly. It's really, it's challenge,
Ah,
but it's so neurologically stimulating.
stimulating.
That's what I'm finding. Like I'm working so hard at it. I feel so stupid. I think, if I was 6 years old, I'd be learning this stuff 3 times faster than I am now. I'm sure of it.
That's
My
not true.
brain, I'm just old and my brain I have to forget
It's
more.
because you can't hear 1300 hertz. That's why.
Well, yeah, no, it is not that. It's because I have too much shit in my head already. I got to
Yeah.
unlearn shit. Like, my brain, I've trained my brain to play a certain way, play bass a certain way. So I have to teach my fingers to do totally different things. And it's really neurologically fun. It's I'm enjoying it.
It's good for you. It's better than cardio. I'll tell you what.
Well, I'll do that too. Keep both up.
So this seems like a good place to end part 2 of the physics of sound. It's basic anatomy for the next couple of episodes, the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear, and we'll be looking at them through the lens of the musician and the audiologist. The website will be up this week at thetinnitusmanifesto.com. You can reach us there, or you can find us on the social medias, Facebook, YouTube, and eventually some other stuff too. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, you can reach me at chris@thetinnitusmanifesto.com. Thanks, y'all, and do not burn those cochlear hairs.
Don't burn the hives. Don't burn the hives. Don't burn the hives. Don't burn the hives. Whoa.